Key is key, as in hugely important, fundamental. Unlocking it reveals the secrets of music. Key is immense, and so this is going to be the first of 5 videos I'll be making on this huge topic. So, why do composers pick a particular key? That's a very interesting question with a number of answers. In fact, I found 4, each of them fascinating subjects. It's worth a quick reminder first, what is key? Well, you know how pretty much every piece of classical music comes at you with a letter? That letter tells you the key the piece has been written in. Composers have a choice of as many keys as there are notes. There's 12 notes in the musical scale, from C through C sharp all the way to B, but each key can be in major or minor mode, which means composers have a choice of 12 times 2 keys, 24 keys from which to choose. Have you ever noticed the preponderance of D when composing a violin concerto? You haven't? Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Brahms, Sibelius. Each of these are single violin concertos, the only violin concertos that these composers wrote, and they're written in D. And that's more than a crazy coincidence, that's a conspiracy. Well, tinfoil hats off, there's a rational reason for this. D is a great key for the violin, because 3 of the 4 open strings on the violin are D, A and G, which is D plus its 2 closest harmonic friends, the dominant A and the subdominant G. Which means you've got a lot of opportunities when playing the violin for playing double stop, i.e. playing with open strings at the same time as the closed strings. The inherent design of a particular instrument can make a difference to the key a composer selects for that instrument. You can find a similar thing, for example, with flute concertos, where most of everything, as far as I can glean, is in G major or D major. So, the design of a particular instrument may well dictate a composer's choice of key. But these instruments also may affect the composer's thought process in a slightly different way. Choosing a key really decides where, in a musical octave, our music is pitched, which means a composer may hear a particular key or pitch for his music, which means they're hearing, for example, the violins, the violas, the cellos, the string section, playing at a certain register. And moving that pitch halfway up the octave or downwards would cause all those instruments to play different parts of the music in different octaves of music in different registers. When Beethoven was composing his 7th Symphony in A, he heard all the string section playing those scales at a register that sounded right for his ear. So secondly, a composer might choose a key literally to do with how high, up or down he's hearing his music. Although some may wish it were otherwise, it really doesn't make a great deal of difference to the universe what key you compose your symphony in. Does it really make a difference if your key is pitched at 440 Hz as opposed to 445 Hz? And yet, composers feel very different things for these different keys that are pitched very, very closely to each other. Composers seem to be attracted towards certain keys. This study has been created by a data scientist called Seth Kaddish, and it's fascinating. It looks at the preponderance of keys for particular composers. The more towards the blue, the more the composer writes in that key. And it's fascinating to look at this and see how different composers were attracted to different keys. Beethoven, for example, used C minor, and even more, its relative major, E flat, for, well, a majority of works, but not just a majority of works, for a lot of his most important works. The 5th Symphony, the 3rd Symphony, the 5th Piano Concerto, the Tedic Piano Sonata. Beethoven just seemed to save C minor and E flat to express his grandest thoughts. Mozart was more attracted to D minor for his more tragic moments. His Requiem, for example, or the main drama of Don Giovanni. All of which serves up a spicy and rich stew of meta-meaning in the classical universe. The choices of composers inevitably influences later composers, keys become imbued with certain meaning, and so much so that in the 19th century guides were created that could describe the different characteristics of different keys, which doesn't really make sense. Now this is a big subject that deserves its own video, but in the age we exist now with equal temperament, the actual key you compose in doesn't make a huge load of difference. Musicians became obsessed on this subject, with composers like the Russian Scriabin, who's convinced he had a colour-coded reference for music that was objectively true. So D major was a bright key, so that was the key of treasure, and it meant something to him that treasure would be in a certain key in a certain opera. Only, it's just not true. And you can tell it's not true because our entire sense of pitch has actually shifted over the last 400 years. Which is to say, the note A 400 years ago was a slightly different note to the note A we're hearing now. We actually still have Handel's tuning fork, and his A was actually measured at 422.5 Hz, and we also have Beethoven's tuning fork, and his A was measured at 455.4 Hz, all different A's. So Beethoven's Fifth wouldn't have sounded at the same pitch in 1805 as it does in 2022. And yet, no doubt, it would all still sound like Beethoven's Fifth to us today. So anyway, there's a personal history of key and key associations that may affect a composer in a personal way in his choice of key, which leads us to a final point, and probably the broadest point. So it's not just the personal prejudices of particular composers. In fact, our entire system of music is not just biased, but indeed built upon a bias towards certain keys, specifically C major. C major, it's just our home key, it's our starting point, it's the first scale any musician learns. The piano keyboard is physically constructed with this bias built into it. The white keys on a piano play the scale of C major. This puts a huge emphasis in our system towards C and C major as a kind of starting point to any musical journey. Mozart, Beethoven, they would all started at very young ages with C major. And so, Beethoven writes his first symphony in C major, his first piano concerto. Ditto Haydn for his first piano concerto. Now, once we have our first starting key, C major, then other keys have a relative relationship to this newly promoted home key of C major. Broadly, the next two closest keys are G major and F major, but their relationship is in different directions. G major sharpens us upward, whereas F major flattens us downward. This means, as a broad generality, F major tends to be associated with mellower sounds that sit below our home key of C, and that means F major is traditionally more of a tranquil and pastoral key. So, when we sharpen the key from C major, we literally add sharps, 1 for G major, 2 for D major. So we have a predisposition, a natural bias towards hearing that sound as raised. Even the accents that describe this process inherently bias us. Sharps sharpen the sound, and flats flatten it. And so, D major, with its two sharps, tends to be a happy key. Think of Scriabin's golden treasure in D. And D is often a common response key, i.e. often important second works are composed in D. Beethoven's Second Symphony, for example. Or Brahms, the same. And so, composers are drawn towards different keys. But I'd also like to make a general point again, which is you can see that composers from different eras are drawn towards different keys. When we look at Mozart and Haydn, we see a preponderance for Ds, Cs, Gs, open keys. As we go into the Romantic period, keys start to become darker, more introspection, more flattened keys used, and especially look at old Liszt, king of Romanticism, what a rich palette he's used in his compositions. And look how composers always seem to avoid B. Okay, I'm going to finish that there, but there's a lot more to say about this subject, and you'll be getting that in my next 4 videos. Thanks!